Welcome to our last Alumni College tutorial. That doesn't mean the day's over. We still have plenty to go tonight. I'm Dave Sushinsky, Director of Alumni Relations, and joining me is Kelly Schroeder, who many of you know. We are not professional artists. We are not even slightly talented artists, but we are going to have fun over the next hour.
Not talented at all artists.
Yes, I've only done one of these in my life. Kelly's done, you said
three, and they were very bad.
Yes, so but we're going to have fun. The graphic you see when it pops up, don't be intimidated. It is a beautiful image taken by our graphic designer on campus, Keely, who is an alum. And if you have appreciated any of the graphics on the website for the alumni weekend that we're doing right now, that's done by Keely. She's going to guide us through this tutorial, and she does a great job at kind of doing it in a way that makes sense for people who are of all different abilities and levels. So if you have your cocktail from the last one, we're ready to go. So let's take it away, Keely. Before I go, hold up. Post your photos at the end to hashtag SMCMAW20. That's 20. We're going to take our favorite photo and then award one alum.
Which will be Dave's, not mine.
A $50 gift card to the campus store. We're also going to have you write in the chat who you think did it better between me and Kelly. So let's have fun over the next hour, and we'll see you at the end.
Tutorial, grab a drink, and let's start to paint. So to start us off, let's start with a reference image. I chose a sunset, so I would just screen grab this. You'll be referring back to this when you're painting. So step one, let's start to sketch. So whenever I approach a painting for the first time, I always put down kind of a reference sketch using a pencil. You can use whatever you want. I am kind of a weird artist and I prefer to use mechanical pencils. I have kind of this weird grip thing, but if you like, you know, your standard graphite pencil or use special artist pencils, you of course can use those. So what I'm doing right now is I'm establishing kind of a horizon line. It's not straight. A lot of beginner artists will draw a straight line across, and that's not really accurate because, you know, a lot of times, unless you're, you know, looking out at a very, very flat area, you're going to have a dipped horizon line. So I'm just using my eye and I'm tracing this area, and I'm kind of establishing general shapes. I'm not putting too much detail into this because I'm going to fill that in with some of my paints later. So as you can see right now, I'm kind of outlining some of the shapes of the water and the pond area in the reference picture, just to kind of give me a roadmap as to where some of my larger blocks of color are going to be, and as well as, you know, the different shapes I'm taking. And again, I'm using my eye. Trust your eye. Always look back at the reference image because that will be honest with you, you know, whereas if you kind of draw from your mind, you might not be as accurate as you'd want to be. So right here, I'm just drawing kind of the area with the houses. I'm establishing.
Can you make the image even smaller,
there's some
Brooke?
land in between the pond area, so I'm kind of trying to establish that. I'm figuring out the tree line as well as kind of where the houses are. With this painting, the foreground is more dark, so I'm not too worried about specific shapes and structures. I'm kind of more or less getting an idea about, you know, where I'm going. And again, I'm going to fill this in later. Some painters and artists really like to be very precise with their reference drawings, but for me, I like to kind of throw caution to the wind and do very simple roadmaps. So now I'm working on the sky. Make sure this is extremely light. You don't want this to, you know, show up later when you're painting. And of course, you know, multiple layers will offset this. Multiple layers of paint will offset this, but just be careful not to draw a really thick dark line. So these lines are representational of where my clouds are going to be. I'm just kind of blocking out these shapes to understand where some of my color will be. Again, I'm taking kind of the upper part of the reddish clouds in this part, establishing where my color will be. And yeah, so that's about it for my sketch.
Lovely to see you.
This will be the roadmap. These are some of the paints that I'm using. I'm using acrylic, which dries quickly, and these are the colors I'm using. If you don't have these colors at home, you can always mix them, but these are the primary colors I use in this painting. I chose to use kind of just general acrylics that you could find at Michael's off the shelves because I wanted to be more accessible to you guys. I'm not sure what you all have at home, if you have fancy paints or not. So I just got kind of the standard, Michael's acrylics that you can do. So right now I'm starting with the really light parts of my painting. I'm starting with the highlights because I just always like to establish the lightest parts of my painting first. I find it's easier to do that because you can always layer color on top of it. If you need to subdue the highlight, it's easier to kind of start by blocking your lighter areas and then building up that darker layer, at least for me. So I'm going ahead and doing that really beautiful highlight area near the sunrise. As you can see, it's not quite yellow yet. I wanted to put down some of my light yellow so that I could really establish that area as one of the lightest parts of the pieces. I'm going to add a little bit of white to this to create a little bit more of the highlight. I didn't clean my brush. Some people clean their brushes in between uses. I actually really like to have those colors together because I find the effect of the light and the mixing of the paints on the brush to be really effective. So I added a little bit of white, and that will be kind of the lightest part of my painting. Now I'm going to add a little bit of those darker colors in, taking a little bit of my yellow, a little bit of my orange, and I want to mix these now. So I'm trying to create kind of a tone that matches the picture and represents kind of a little bit of a darker highlight, but it's not super dark. And I'm mixing on the palette so that I can, see what I'm doing before I go ahead and put it on my canvas. So right now I'm kind of painting that darker part of the picture. I'm just adding a little bit. I don't, really want to cover up my highlights too much. So I'm just kind of painting around these areas, adding a little bit of, a depth to it, but still keeping it very light. As with all painting, I'm pretty much going to be establishing my colors in this kind of first coat of acrylic. I'm establishing where the different tones and colors and moods of my painting are. And then once it dries, I'll go ahead and layer kind of more paint onto this. Here, see, look, I'm trying to make the painting a little bit darker. So I'm adding a little bit more of that orange and that yellow to that mixed color. And I am adding that into the painting. Again, I'm keeping a very light hand here, just kind of mixing with what I have, letting the paint kind of blend with the other tones on my canvas. I'm just working to create that sunset, and I'm always referring back to my reference image. It really helps to keep me kind of on track. So here we go. I'm adding some of my pink in. There's a lot of reddish hues in that sunset, so I want to, especially with the lighter tones, add a little bit of that reddish feeling. So I'm adding some pink, adding a little bit of more pink here, trusting my eye, and building upon those color layers. Now, if you make a mistake during this process, or you feel like, oh no, like I did too much or too little, you can always go back later and add more paint on top of it. Some of the joy of acrylic is that it dries really fast. So, on the one hand, that means that kind of every tone that you're making, happens quickly, but you can always go back and fix it. So here I am creating the water.
No, you
I'm
can't take
using
over.
some
You
of the
started.
colors from my sunset,
You only have
and
15
I'm
more minutes to go.
going down with my brush strokes. Note how I am using the stroke to kind of show the water. When you go down with your brush,
Oh, now we're in the water.
you can
But we're also still in the
make
same palette.
the water look more
Yeah, more
reflective
pink
as well
or
as
just straight pink?
simulate
Sure.
water.
Please mix them in the middle.
It's really important that
Yeah, but
you
now it's all
understand how
yellow
your
in the
brush
water.
strokes affect your work, because
Stop.
brush strokes are incredibly important with regards
My
to
daughter should be interested. Can you make sure you
painting.
watch
So right
her?
now I'm just
Help
going
her
down.
unload
I'm
the cab.
establishing a
We'll be here for 2
darker
more hours.
kind of tone, and
Drop him
I'm
off at
adding a
4:30.
tiny bit of
Yeah.
highlights.
2
Now,
o'clock
the
right
reason
now.
why I'm adding
time
this
is it?
after instead of before is
2
because
o'clock,
I
Kelly.
wanted to mix with the darker tones. So I don't want super light highlight, but I want to add some kind of depth to that and show where the water's reflecting the light from the sunset. Again, I'm kind of mixing it with my pre-existing tones, adding a little bit more, shading as I go, allowing it to blend. And I'm creating this really nice effect with my water. And I'm doing this as I'm painting the sunset so that I can keep the colors very similar. I'm going to be adding more to both elements, but this is a good way to keep up with everything. So now I'm going to flesh out a bit more of the sunset. I'm going to be using some of my blue for the first time, so I'm taking a lot of it and adding it to my pre-existing warm colors. I'm also going to be adding a little bit of pink to it. I want to warm it up a little bit. Sometimes blues can be too cool, so adding some of your pinks and your reds. As you see, I used a light pink and a dark pink to the tone, and then I am darkening it a little bit too. So I am using Payne's Gray. I'm not using a black. A lot of beginner artists use black with their tones to establish deep colors, but I always find that using a darker blue or a dark gray helps with my painting, and it kind of makes me challenge what I'm doing with my work. I'm trying to warm up that mixing color by adding a little bit of red. Red is very powerful, so be careful when you use it. And I'm going to go ahead and start with that middle cloud line. So I'm just establishing it on the canvas, and it's a little bit dark, so I'm going to add a little bit more of that light blue. It's always harder to lighten something that you've made dark, but because I'm not looking to make it super light, I'm just going to add a little bit more and mix it all together. Okay, so I like that color, so I'm going to go ahead and paint more of the cloud line here. Again, I'm doing very soft strokes, just kind of establishing my line. It's not perfect because I'll go ahead and add details later. And I'm trusting my eye. I'm taking a look at, the different places that I'm working with.
About throwing caution to the wind, Keely.
I'm just kind of working with that cloud line. Again, it's okay if it goes on some of the highlight below. You're going to be detailing this again. But this way, I'm really trying to create kind of a base color for that cloud line. So again, just soft strokes. I'm watching my eye, blocking out the color. And again, don't worry if you make a mistake or if your color is too dark or too light. You can always fix it. I find that some of the biggest mistakes that I make painting always turn out to be some of the greatest things that I've done. So I'm adding a little bit of red to my color palette right now, and I'm gonna just accent it a bit underneath kind of the cloud line. So I'm adding some of those red tones into my piece so that I can kind of have that look of the sunset, the look of the red light hitting the clouds. But I'm not using red, I'm using pink. So I find that pink is a good kind of medium with the blue because it adds some of that warmth in, but it's not as stark as like, you know, your crimson or your vermilion. So I'm just kind of adding some of that tone. I'm mixing as I go. Again, I don't really like strips of color unless I'm doing digital art, which is a very different beast. But I'm just kind of adding some of those warmer tones into my painting. And I'm not using the whole tin because I'm going to use some of that blue a little bit later. But I just want to add a little bit of warmth to the edges. See, I'm using my brush very carefully on the underside of the cloud. I'm just trying to establish, you know, some of those tones. I'm using a very light hand, slowly mixing, slowly adding those tones in with kind of the redder and pinker part towards the bottom of the cloud. And kind of going up. Again, I'm getting this all from the photograph. I'm just looking at the photograph and then painting my tones as I have them. So I'm going to go ahead and add some blue. I still like the warmth of that, but I want it to be a little bit lighter. So I'm going to go ahead and mix some more of that light blue and that white into my tone. And then I want it to be a little bit more royal blue, if that makes sense. So I'm adding just a tiny bit of the royal blue into my painting, and I'm gonna go ahead and start doing that top left corner. If you notice, the blue here is a little bit less red because of the way the sky is illuminated by the sun. So I'm gonna try to add a little bit more of that light blue at the top left corner. I'm throwing caution to the wind here, and I'm just doing pretty big, strict strokes. But, you know, just making sure that it's controlled, but that, you know, you can cover a lot of the ground of the painting. I'm going to go ahead and later layer kind of the clouds on top of this. So it's not a big deal if you don't make this perfect. But I'm just trying to, again, cover as much as I can in this upper part. And okay, so I established that, but I need to kind of work on some of my colors. So I'm adding a little bit more royal to that lighter kind of coat. Okay, so that's about good. So I'm going to go ahead and use that color up at the top left. Again, I'm referencing my reference photo, and I'm just trying to establish some of that tone at the top of the painting. I'm mixing as I go down and just making sure that it's nice and blue at the top. And then I'm going ahead and doing that at the upper right part of the painting here. Again, I'm not trying to, you know, create blocks of color, but I'm trying to mix them to show kind of the tone of the sky and how it's, you know, changing as we're painting. So now I'm going to add a little bit of some darkness to my mixed paint. Again, just a little bit, not too much. I don't want it to be super dark. And then I'm going to take this, I'm going to use this kind of behind the clouds. If you can see in the picture, it kind of goes from this royal blue, lighter blue, to this a little bit darker tone because of the way that the clouds work with the sky. So I'm just adding a little bit of that darkness to that area. Again, mixing upwards as I go. So that, you know, it has a nice transition in between all of that. But I still like to have those tones. So here I am. I'm going to mix again with this blue. It's a much deeper blue kind of than I was before, but that's okay because I'm working with kind of my layers and my color tones. So I'm adding it to the upper left corner of my painting. Again, trying to really flesh out that blue without doing too much. And I'm, again, kind of watch how I do my strokes. I'm kind of mixing as I'm painting these. So now I'm going to do some of my upper cloud line. So I'm taking some of my pink here, and I'm going to mix it with the blue again. I'm just kind of warming up the blue and I'm going to add that to that horizon line. Now, you know, don't panic when you do this. I'm just adding a little bit of this line. I'm going to go probably fix this when I get to my detailing stage, but I'm trying to grab that little bit of cloud, a little bit too dark when I did it. So I'm just adding a little bit of that light pink over top of that cloud line. I'm just going to lighten it a bit and just show it at kind of the bottom of my sunset. Again, I'm trusting my eye. I'm making sure that, you know, I can go ahead and add this little detail in. And again, I haven't switched brushes this whole time.
Hey, Gretchen, how many people
If
are
you feel more
tuned in?
comfortable switching brushes, you can, but I just kind of like to work with, you know, one brush and kind of see where it takes me. So, okay, so I'm adding a little bit of pink and yellow. I'm not yellow, light pink. Whoa, to that, and I'm gonna start on my upper cloud portion. So this part, I'm taking this kind of this darker pink with this light, but and I'm mixing some of the blue in to kind of give it a different contrasting feel to the layer of the bluish gray kind of underneath of it. But I still want it to be different enough so that when I do my detailings, which are lighter, I'll still have a base coat to work on. So as you can see, I'm just kind of adding the colors in very lightly and patting my brush down with the colors. And again, I'm just working with kind of that sketched shape from the clouds that I initially started with. And I'm slowly kind of adding those in. And I'm outlining kind of some of the shapes and just kind of dabbing my brush, adding some texture.
All right, we're doing a checkpoint. Hope you guys are following along. There's a close-up of Kelly. We have quite the Picasso here. So there's that. So Kelly, and then
hold it up.
there we go. There we go. So there's mine. I'm trying to follow along as best I can.
We need Brooks.
All right, shoot back to Kelly. We gotta
there we go.
shoot back to Kelly.
Look how pretty mine is. Much more prettier than his. It's more, right? It's very, you know, I don't know.
Abstract.
Abstract.
All right. So I feel comfortable that I'm winning so far.
What?
I feel pretty comfortable that I'm winning so far. If we're truly a true test to match Keely. So let's come back to Keely.
But
and
if we're doing true artiste,
we'll check in another 20 minutes or so.
There we go.
And again, if this isn't precise, don't worry, because these are clouds. Clouds are very forgiving. So when you're painting, always think, you know, things that you have to be precise on, you know, and what you know, they vary. So like if you're painting the water or you're painting an ocean, they don't always have to be perfect because of the nature of what you're painting. A lot of times they're very forgiving. So with these clouds, you know, I'm referencing the painting, but I'm also, you know, having a little bit of fun with it and, you know, trying to, you know, establish different color values. So now I'm going to work on kind of that lighter cloud part. I'm taking some of my yellow, I'm taking some of my orange, and I'm mixing it with that pink that I was working with before. I'm going to add a little bit of lightness there to kind of cool some of the tones. The yellow and the orange are extremely bright, so I'm just trying to kind of work with some of that. And okay, so once I do that, I'm going to take this color and I'm just going to carefully put it on where I want to highlight in the clouds. It's okay if it mixes a bit with the pink, as long as you have a light hand, it'll look okay. And if it ever seems to be mixing too much, you can always refresh and get some more paint on your brush like I'm doing here. So I'm going ahead and adding some of that highlight to that base, just using very careful lines and kind of trailing my brush across the clouds.
I lose patience.
I'm mixing it as I go,
I lose patience.
and I'm just dabbing lightly. Again, I'm not doing big swaths of color. I'm kind of just seeing how it goes and dabbing and mixing with my brush. I find that way it creates prettier colors, and it makes everything look a little bit more realistic. So here I am, establishing some of that color and establishing some of those accents, and kind of going up into the various strings of clouds. Again, trusting my eye as I'm going, and just making sure that I can do this. So I'm adding a little bit more highlight to this area. Again, just taking the light yellow and adding that accent. I know that, right now it looks a little bit messy, but, we're going to be building more and more color up on this. So it's totally okay, because we're going to be able to make it more detailed later. So I'm adding a little bit of white here to my clouds, just to kind of get that sunspot in, just to add a little bit more of that lightness. And I'm mixing. So it's not like there's a giant white blob there. It's just, kind of an area of light in the cloud. And again, if you can see, the range of my color varies from side to side. Now I'm going ahead and adding more color to the cloud area, and what I'm doing right now is establishing more of the kind of offshoots of the cloud, some of the more, lighter kind of puffy parts, just adding a little bit more depth to what I'm doing here. And again, I'm keeping a very light brush as I'm going about this.
Light brush, caution to the wind.
Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm adding a little bit of that color down into the cloud below. Again, not much. I'm keeping a very light hand, and then I'm going ahead and going to the different parts of the cloud, kind of adding more of those wisps. Again, this is more kind of detailed, but we'll add even more detail on top of all of this. So again, just kind of adding some of the clouds, some of the accents, keeping a very light hand, and just kind of lightly patting with my paintbrush with the lighter pink. And it's okay if some of the blue shows through, because if you look at the reference painting, that's what the cloud is doing as well. So it kind of creates some of that translucent area and quality to the painting. So now what I'm doing is I'm continuing to shade and add a little bit more of that depth. So right now I'm once again doing kind of the shadow with my paintbrush. So right now I'm establishing kind of the shadow from the shore, and I'm using a dark bluish pink. I tried to cool down some of my pinks. So I'm adding that shadow in the lower right hand corner of the painting. And I'm just going to go up and around using the downward strokes to kind of create that depth. Now don't panic on this part. I know it's very different from what you're doing, but you're creating depth and value here. And I'm going to start flicking kind of my paintbrush up. As you can see here, I have a very dry brush right now. There's very little paint on my brush, and I'm kind of putting that dark area into the lighter area above. I'm going to end up adding kind of some more oranges on top of this, but I'm just trying to kind of show kind of some of how the shadow works. And again, a very dry brush. And I'm going to kind of do that to the upper part of this too. And if you can see, I'm kind of diverting from my line right now. So, and that's okay, because I can always define that later. And now I'm just adding a little bit of that kind of reddish tone to the shadow. Again, I have very little paint on my brush, and I'm very light with my strokes. So I'm trying to add kind of this dry brush technique to kind of create more of a depth and shadow to some of my water
with water.
areas. And
Right?
again, I'm adding a little bit more red
What do you see? What do you see?
to that area. Again, it's kind of working with the sunset. And I'm gonna
So I should
add a little bit more blue into that area.
so I should take
As you can see, I had a little bit too much
so
pink
if I
there,
should-
but you know
if I
what, that's
put some
okay
more,
because
it looks like
this is part of the
highlight.
painting process. So I'm making that area a little bit darker,
So I should
more
keep the top,
blue,
or give it the top.
working
middle
with
is what I
kind of
have
some
to
of the tones and
touch.
values, and I'm gonna
Okay.
kind of keep doing some of that a dry
Okay.
brush technique with creating lines
Okay.
and shapes that kind of work with the highlight of the
Please, somebody
water.
help me, Dave.
And again, I'm always referencing back to my photo. It's like, it's not going to be perfect, but as long as I kind of understand what's going on, you know, I'll be able to do more. So right now I'm going to do the foreground. So I'm taking a lot of my dark blue, I'm adding some of the light blue to kind of offset it. Then I'm adding a little bit more of the royal, and then I want to warm it up just a tiny bit. So I'm adding a splash of red. So this is going to be most of my foreground. Again, keep warming. If it doesn't look warm enough, just keep going. So now it's kind of like a dark grayish purpley color. Now I'm never using direct black. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But right now I'm just kind of establishing my shoreline. I'm using a darker color. And I'll kind of layer on top of that to kind of show my area. But again, because the photo is so dark and so high contrast, I'm kind of establishing a very simple shoreline. And again, you know, if it's not there in the picture, that's okay, because sometimes as artists you have to edit down, you know, what you see to create a good composition and a good painting. So, and with this painting, I'm really trying to kind of show the sky kind of more. The ground is not necessarily as important as the lake and the sky. So I've gone ahead and created a shoreline. I'm going to be doing this on the other side as well. So one thing that's really important with landscape painting is that the darker you go, the more your color kind of stands out. So see what I'm doing here? I'm adding a little bit of that dark gray, almost black, and I'm shading it in. I'm trying to kind of represent kind of the houses and that tree line, and just create a little bit of depth there, but not too much. The thing is with really dark colors is that they kind of pull your painting forward. So you typically want to use them for important close-up details. And I'm going to be doing that kind of more on the foliage and the foreground of this later on in the video, but it's always something to think of. So like if you were to create, you know, the horizon line, you know, that little bit of tree line kind of in the back of the middle of your painting with black, that'll stand out and kind of pull your viewer forward. So to create distance in your pieces, you kind of want to err on the side of lighter. So see here, I'm still doing that same purpley grayish tone in the front of my foreground, but I'll be pulling a lot of the elements of that front of the pond forward with that dark gray later. And again, you know, because this painting is kind of at sunset and it's you know, at a time when there are really high contrast, you know, you do have to still be true to, you know, what you see and what you're painting. But, you know, if you were to do something, you know, at different times, or even with this painting, it's like, just remember that like black kind of will immediately draw your eye and pull you forward. So always be careful with your value. In your painting. So right here, I'm just kind of cleaning up that line around the pond, and I'm doing a little bit more of the horizon here. I'm probably going to switch to a smaller brush to do kind of some of the finer details here. And again, I've only used one brush this entire time. If you feel the need to clean your brush or, you know, switch out brushes for different sizes, please be happy to. But, you know, I just like to have a very simple approach when I'm painting, especially when I'm painting for a big group of all skill levels. Yeah, so right there, I'm kind of like establishing the tree line, but I'm not going to do the finer details until later. Again, I'm still just kind of blocking some of the colors. And here I am doing that horizon line. And I'm gonna grab a small brush, if you can see, and I'm just gonna do some finer details right here. So, you know, again, I'm just doing that kind of that fine horizon line, a little bit lighter than some of the darker parts of my painting, because I really don't want the viewer to be pulled forward. It's more kind of in the distance. So again, I'm just kind of, you know, working with that. I'm doing the bridge right now. That area in the foreground, just thin lines. I'll be fleshing it out a little bit more later, so no need to worry. And yeah, I'm just kind of developing the lines here, still using that purple, still using that kind of light value. Okay, and then this is where I'm kind of adding a little bit of more shape to kind of the pond area. I'm going to switch to my bigger brush, and again, I'm just going to add a little bit more detail kind of in this ground. I'm looking at my reference photo and, you know, just adding, just painting what I see and, you know, just trying to establish a bit more value and shape of the area. And then I'm going to go ahead and do some of the darker shadows on the pond. I'm using the same color as kind of the land because that's what it looks like in my picture. And also later we'll be adding some highlights with the white street lamps, which is going to be fun. I'll show you how that kind of works with the lake. It really does create a cool effect. So I'm just going ahead and adding some of that shadow into my painting. I'm following my eye, but you know, I'm just trying to create kind of this fuzzy dry brush look, and I'm putting more pressure down when I'm trying to have more solid colors. So that's kind of what I'm doing over here. I'm just going and fixing up a little bit of the areas to the left. And then now I'm going to use my darker color to kind of work in a little bit of the foreground. I'm just kind of doing shapes. I'm experimenting with my brush because, you know, it's dusk, you know, you can't really see what's going on, you know, but it's not black. So I'm trying to add a little bit more depth without, you know, explicitly outlining certain shapes and figures. I'm just kind of creating some of the foliage in the front with that really dark gray value. It's not black, it's dark gray. It looks black on my camera, but it's dark bluish gray. And I'm just adding some of that tone to the front of the picture. I'm not putting it into the pond yet, just because I kind of like to establish that left side as being kind of more of the ground area. But yeah, okay, so now I'm going to take my smaller brush and I'm going to do a little bit of the detailing. I do some now and I do some later when it's a little bit more dry. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of flick my wrist a little bit, just add very thin kind of foliage lines near the lake along that edge. And that'll give you a little bit of detail to your painting without, you know, adding, you know, a ton of ideas. So I'm mixing a little bit of that dark gray and just kind of using some of that to create just a little bit of accents. Again, these are just small kind of elements. I'll be fleshing them out a little bit more later. And I'm I'm not, you know, pressing down super hard or anything. I'm just kind of just lightly adding certain shapes and elements to my
She'll love it.
piece.
So we did this.
And you know,
On Mother's
I
Day,
have
they had Emery
you know, you can
Garcia
even
that
do
were
this with
old,
like toothpicks
cheese
and stuff. You know, it's like you can
And
use
my
whatever
friend, my
technique you want.
my
I
mom,
prefer
my
brushes, and I
mother-in-law,
know it's not
Hannah,
as
and me.
exact, but you
And
know,
we
you
did
can
it. It
use,
was
you know,
so much
whatever
fun.
material you want.
And of course,
Okay, so I'm taking a
Hannah's
brush that's kind of like a fan,
rest
and I'm
of
gonna
her
do a
son.
little bit more accents there. If you don't have
Rest
it,
of
it's
the
fine. You can do it by hand and just, you know, do it
Where's
really,
that
really
fan from?
softly.
Really good.
But I'm just kind of demonstrating a
Oh,
different
wait,
like,
what's this? Oh,
technique that you can do, just adding a little bit more of that foliage. This is really common for like leaves on trees, this type of brush. They're really cheap at Michael's. I think I'm using like one of the beginner ones just because I wanted to, again, use kind of whatever you might have around your house. So this is just another technique to kind of create some of that foliage in the foreground. Now with this foliage, I'm not using the super dark color. I'm using the lighter kind of background color. Here's another technique. You can kind of go up and down with your brush, kind of establish different strokes to create certain feelings. You can pat, you know, create some dry brush effect. But you're just adding a little bit of that accent and the illusion of kind of elements of what's in the foreground. And again, I'm gonna take kind of some of that darkness. I'm gonna work it down in the front a little bit more to create a little bit more depth in the front. It's not, again, it's not, you know, as much fun as say, you know, painting the sunset, but it just establishes kind of some more depth in your piece. And it's almost like, you know, you can tell that something's in the foreground versus in the background. We can add a little bit of that darkness over here to show that, you know, there's something in front of the trees, but we don't know exactly what it is. Again, trying to create layers and layers of depth. But just be careful, don't overdo it, because if you overdo it with black, you can't really go back unless the entire piece dries. So just be careful with some of those elements. Okay, so I think I'm going to switch gears here.
Yeah, and so when it dries, that's when. So when it
Yeah,
dries,
and I'm taking
right
I'm using another small brush again. You can use the brush I'm using, which is kind of more of a straight brush, or you can use a smaller detail-oriented brush. But I'm going to add some of those really colorful, spiky highlights. Right now, my clouds have pretty much dried, so I'm going to be taking. I'm not blending as much as I was doing before, and I'm really going to kind of highlight some of those crisper areas with some color. So I'm just taking the pick right from the right from the bottle, and you know, I'm just gonna be adding that very lightly. I'm just dabbing around the clouds, you know. And again, clouds are forgiving, just as waves or just as water is pretty forgiving. So, you know, I'm just kind of trying to, you know, add some highlights to that area and make it look really, really beautiful. And so I'm building lots of kind of layers on top of each other because when I do this, I can, you know, it's like there's so many different elements of the piece that can be pulled forward and stand out, and you're kind of to be a little cheesy, you're almost creating a piece of music with your painting, right? Because each part is communicating with each other. And so I'm just going to go ahead and dab around. I'm referencing my reference image, but I'm also using my eye as well to see, you know, what would look good and what stands out. Just adding a little bit of that pinkish detail. This is, I'm using a little bit of white, just dabbing it on kind of the dry parts, adding a little bit of that pinkish highlight, just adding a little bit more depth and clouds just to kind of mimic how the light kind of works. You know, some elements of the cloud are in front of others and some aren't. So, you know, I'm just kind of adding a little bit more of that detailing Just kind of tapping around with my brush. And, you know, again, I'm not being very stressed out about this. I'm just relaxed and creating different values and tones. And gonna add a little bit more of that orangey white color. I'm mixing it up here because that gray part is still not dry. So if you wanna, you know, pause me and go wash everything and do that, you know, you're absolutely welcome to. But I'm just, you know, improvising and doing a bit here. So I'm just adding a little bit of that orange and that white and a little bit of yellow, I think, to that color. And I'm just going to dab a little bit, create some kind of more colorful accents around my clouds. Always checking my reference image, but also understanding that, you know, sometimes you just got to improvise a little bit. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm adding in a lot of the colors of the sunset, and I'm really trying to bring out those beautiful, very saturated colors. But if you notice, I didn't start with them. I started with kind of a more neutral tone. And the reason is because, you know, for me as an artist, I always find that the very colorful spikes of, you know, color, or you know, even in design, when I'm doing design, it's like certain colors kind of grab your attention more than others. And so it's always really good to have your really saturated colors as accents. And you know, at least for paintings like this, where you're trying to create more of a realistic type of landscape. And so I'm still going over kind of some of those areas. I'm covering up the highlight a little bit and dabbing my orange. Again, I'm just kind of working on that beautiful, beautiful sunset. And again, there's different ways of doing things, you know. So here I am taking some pink and red. I'm going to add a little bit more to the cloud line. So if you look in the picture, there's kind of a red highlight along the bottom of the cloud. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of that detailing in. I'm going to do it across the entire bottom and kind of swipe up a little bit. Yeah, see what I'm doing? I'm just taking a little bit of that color and working up again. Again, my hand is very light. I'm not, you know, pressing down super hard, but I'm just trying to kind of show that some of that light from the cloud is kind of blocking the sun is carried up into that area. And I'm just continuing to go ahead and push some of that pink up into the cloud. I'm going to be doing this all across the bottom. Again, my brush strokes are very light, you know, because I want to create the pattern of that light, but not create, you know, any specific shapes or anything. I'm just trying to show the illusion of the water vapor in the clouds. And again, like if there's a little bit of orange or yellow or white that gets in, you know, it just kind of adds flavor to the painting. So I'm going to go ahead and add more detail up on the cloud parts. I'm trying to emulate some of the kind of wispiness of the clouds up in the top and show them, you know, how they kind of break into that blue area. Just dabbing my paintbrush as I'm going about this, creating, you know, depth with, you know, the pressure of how I'm applying the brush, adding a little bit of highlights, getting that light pink mixed with a little bit of that light orange, and really kind of creating some cool textures here. And again, this is supposed to be fun, so you know, it's really just adding kind of that extra special layer of details to create the beauty of the sunset. And here I am, you know, adding just a little bit more of those lines. If you notice, I'm pretty much going in one direction with this to kind of emulate the wind as well. So, you know, I'm going up towards the corner, but, you know, you can add different strokes different ways. Now I'm adding a lot of those kind of darker clouds on the horizon. So I'm taking some of that pink, and notice my brush is parallel to the ground, pretty parallel to the ground. And I'm adding some of that, the side texture of the clouds along that area. And I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of that towards kind of that bottom line of clouds. I'm just lightening it a bit. It was, I felt that the blue was too stark a contrast. So I'm adding a little bit of that pinkish orange kind of up in the cloud line. And again, add as much or as little as you like. I find it adds a lot of interesting flavor to the sunset. And I'm also doing a little bit of the dry brush technique there. If you saw, I was creating a little bit of that wispiness in the corner with kind of a more dry brush. Whereas this over here, what I'm painting right now, is a little bit more of a wet brush at the bottom. And then kind of when I dab upwards, I have kind of more of a dry, light stroke. And here I am, this is I was very nervous when I was doing this part up into the highlight, but I'm adding a little bit more of that orange pink kind of cloud line, very light hand. I'm barely touching the canvas just to add a little bit of that stroke, and I'm connecting it to kind of the larger orangey pink part, and that creates kind of that immediate cloud line in front of that. And then here I am just adding a little bit more details up at the top on both sides, just kind of give that element of depth and space. And again, like all of these details were added after kind of the initial coat. So I just feel like this is the appropriate way to do it, because you can just build and build and build. And, if this tutorial was 3 hours long, we could build way more on top of this. But, just for a pretty simple sunset right now, I think it's pretty suffice to say that it works well. So yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and add a bit more detail, but again, like, just take a look and take time to survey your painting and see what details that you want to add. So right now I'm adding a little bit of that orange to the water, just because I ended up with all of the detailing added. Added a lot more orange to the top part of the painting. So I'm adding in some of these details now over the dry kind of base. And if you see, I'm actually going to do a lot of kind of blending and dry brush work. So, it doesn't make sense right now, but it will kind of on that detailing. And if you don't, like what you've done, or you want to repaint, the great thing about acrylic is that it dries really quickly. If you were using oil or something that doesn't dry as quickly, you'd have to wait and then change it, or you would have to kind of remix it. But because it's acrylic paint, especially cheap acrylic paint, it dries extremely quickly, and it allows you to kind of build up those layers. So right now I'm just kind of dabbing some of my colors, some of my oranges and pinks, and I'm using a little bit of dry brush to kind of pull those colors down into the pond. Again, I'm kind of using that down. I was using a little bit of the dabbing, but I'm really trying to keep my brush strokes downward again to kind of work with that reflection of the water, because I find that going up and down with your brush strokes really kind of alludes to water. Right now I'm doing a little bit of that dry brush technique, where I have kind of the excess paint that's on my brush, and I'm just kind of pulling it down into that area. And because I'm doing this after adding kind of some of the front details, I'll go back and I'll flesh out more of the grasses and stuff like that. And I'm pulling down some of that orange, because that area on the lower right is still part of the pond. So I still want to allude that there's water there. And I'll show you, I have a trick that I'm using kind of for later in the piece. But I wanted to make sure that I had at least some elements of that color being pulled down. So now I'm using some of my dark paint again, a little bit of my light to add a little bit more of details again, adding a little bit white if I want to make it, you know, less dark, just to add those elements in.
Yeah, I think I win.
And I'm gonna go ahead and add, I'm gonna add the road up in the corner. If you look at my reference picture, you can see a car and a road, but I just kind of want to add a little bit of that detail. Not too much, because the focus is the colors of the sunset, but I just want to add a little bit of depth to the painting. So I'm adding kind of a light gray kind of road in the corner, and I'm adding a little bit of the pathway, you know, so that it, you know, you can see where it goes on the campus. And again, it's just detailing. I decided not to, you know, flesh out every single house, every single, you know, thing, because I really wanted to focus on the bright colors and create a good contrast between the two. And here I am I'm just adding a little bit of detailing to the sides of the pond, just adding a little bit of that shadow. And I'm gonna kind of bring it down a little bit into the dark right corner of the piece. And now I've kind of created more of a shape to that water area. And it just really kind of fleshes out the entire scene. Okay, so now this is always my favorite part. I practiced this piece a lot when I was kind of preparing for this, but I'm going to add the street light. So what I do is I just dot where I want the street lights to be. Just take a white, make sure your brush is clean or your paint is dry or whatever, because you don't really want other colors. But I just go ahead and I use my reference image and I just put the different street lamps where they are. And they don't all have to be the same size. They don't all have to be the same shape. But I'm just adding that little bit of light detail. And you don't want to do overkill, because it'll look like you have like a paint by numbers type of thing going on. But just adding a little bit of that white, and then to kind of flesh that out a little bit more, we're gonna put that into the pond to show the reflection of those lamps. So what I do is I take my brush, I kind of go down a little bit with it, and then kind of dot a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight, but you want it to, you know, be as close to aligning with the above street lamps. And I just go ahead and I add them down to kind of show that light is reflecting off the water, and it really kind of outlines where your pond is as well. And it's a very subtle detail. You know, this is an extreme highlight, and you just want, you know, a little bit to show, you know, where you're going with your painting and the light. And again, you can vary the sizes based on their distance. You know, the ones that are closer will probably have longer reflections, as opposed to the ones kind of in the distance, because, you know, the light doesn't travel as far. Again, I'm just adding a little bit of details. This one's a little bit smaller than my other ones, so just adding very subtle details. I'm adding a little bit more to the one on the right, just to kind of make it look a little bit closer. And yeah, and if you see the technique I'm using, I'm just kind of having it trail off just a little bit, but not be a direct straight line, just kind of like imagine it as a kind of a raindrop, you know, like you put it down and then it's kind of dripping down. So, and I'm trying to show very still water. If it was, you know, really ripply water, it would look a little bit different, but that's kind of what I'm going for. So yeah, so that's kind of the light, and I think I'm gonna have one over here just so that, you know, it looks a little bit closer. So here I'm, you know, using kind of the flatter edge of my brush and pulling that down, and then that kind of creates that look and feel to the pond. I mean, again, these are all kind of finishing details. I mean, we're not creating a perfect representation of the view from the townhouses, but you know, we're just adding a little bit of that detailing in. Okay, so now I'm taking some of my dark colors, and I'm going to add a little bit more detail to the trees and to the front of the pond area. So I'm just very lightly, and not black, I'm just using like that kind of that dark purpley gray color. I'm just adding a little bit of details by, you know, lightly adding my stroke upwards. And, you know, I'm just, you know, trying to show that there are trees, but I'm not like defining every single branch and twig and all of that. I'm just kind of showing that they are there, but that, you know, they're far away, so we can't make out every single detail. And it's just elements like this that, you know, I really like, because it gives you kind of the illusion of space and the illusion of, you know, a more complicated thing, but you're not really doing that because the strokes are very simple and very, very still. So yeah, and again, that just creates kind of a more interesting kind of horizon kind of break and sky break right there. And I'm going to do it on the other side. Again, just very lightly, very thin strokes. I'm dabbing, you know, you could probably do it with, you know, anything that you would like. There are different techniques for all of this. I'm just trying to keep it simple for you guys, you know, but you can always use different size brushes or, you know, other things. I mean, toothbrushes are really good for like foam and stuff like that. So, you know, you could always try to, you know, experiment with different things, but I'm just doing it with kind of that thin brush, that small brush for speed. And just, again, adding a little bit more of those details in. Yeah, and just trying to make it look like a tree, you know. And there are different techniques for different trees. But yeah, I just want to show that there's a little bit of space there. And then I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bit more detail. I want to add some of the darker kind of details to the front, just to kind of highlight some of those areas that, you know, I kind of edit a little bit with some of the pink and the orange. So yeah, I'm just, again, taking my darker kind of pigment and just creating some shapes and, you know, just creating a little bit of grass and foliage. It's totally fine if you, you know, don't create everything perfectly. You know, if you want to, you of course can. But, you know, just for this purpose, I just want to create a little bit of, you know, area in the front, and, you know, just create it and really enjoy kind of this view. I'm just, again, just using light strokes, kind of some like hashing a little bit on the front of the brush, but yeah. And again, I'm looking at my reference image, but now I'm just kind of, you know, seeing what I see and just trying to, you know, make more sense with the context of the larger work. You know, and again, like, you can paint anything. I mean, you know, sunsets are a little bit easier to paint than, you know, some like a forest during the day, you know, something with a lot of details, but you know, at least in my opinion, some people may disagree, but you know, it's always like you can add these elements in that make it look nice and clean, even if it's like high contrast like this. And here I am adding the bridge. I had left this out earlier, but I just wanted to add a little bit of that in. So here we go. Thank you all for joining me. We've completed a painting together. I hope yours turned out really well.
Mine did not, but that's okay.
Okay, wow. So I tried. I can tell you that much. I think Kelly tried. She's still finger painting over there. Now is the big reveal. So we need you to write in the chat which one not did it better, because I'm sure that we'll get some votes for Kelly. Who did it more accurately and better? So we're gonna go that way. So here's my attempt. Not fantastic, but not the worst. And then Kelly, we'd like you to do your big reveal.
So here's my deal. So what I did trying to be sustainable, as we, part of the St. Mary's Way
Hold up.
is that I made a picture of the campus farm, and I used all of my paints because I don't want to waste anything, right? So I used all my paints, and I made a picture of the campus farm.
Ta-da.
So there you go. Ta-da.
All right. So, okay, who did it better? Put your vote in the chat. And I want to thank all of you for putting it through. If you did participate this afternoon, please take a picture of your work. We want to see how you did. Post it to hashtag SMCMAW20. Again, hashtag SMCMAW20. If you are on Instagram, make sure you tag at smcm.alumni. Again, at smcm.alumni, so we can see it on our social media feed. That concludes our last of the Alumni College classes. At this point, we hope that you gather your all of the things you need for the backyard crab feast and barbecue. You don't have to have crabs. You don't have to have barbecue. Whatever you're doing for dinner, put on your St. Mary's gear. Bring out your old Alumni Weekend pint classes. We're going to have a good time. Take a lot of photos. Share those with us. We're going to set up for our crab feast right here at the River Center. And we're going to be tuning into Facebook Live over those 2 hours. Not consecutively, but we want to jump in and share some things with you. So tune into Facebook Live to hang out with the staff and enjoy the beautiful St. Mary's River behind us. Special thanks to Keely again for putting this beautiful artwork together. We hope you have something proud that you want to hang on to your wall now that we've done this. Thanks again. I'll check in with you guys at 5 o'clock on Facebook Live.